On Uncommon Knowledge today, Christopher Hitchens, the author of the best-selling book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, which indeed is such a big bestseller that you can do what I did and walk into your local bookstore and get it off the bestseller rack for 30% off. If Christopher Hitchens does not believe in God, reviewers have asked, then where does he get his sense of right and wrong? You have replied in print that this question is in itself insulting, and you have rejected, quote, the appalling insinuation that I would not know right from wrong if I was not supernaturally guided, close quote. Why do you find it insulting?
Because I think it's degrading to the human, to us, to you and me, to imply, well, not to imply, to state directly that absent a celestial dictatorship that had some supernatural influence over us, yet to be established, by the way, as anything really existent, but without the assumption of it, we wouldn't know right from wrong. We wouldn't return stolen property if we found it in the back of a cab. We wouldn't give blood if someone badly needed a transfusion, unless we were afraid either of punishment or desirous of a reward, that we might help ourselves to underage children, as some religious people have actually been known to do. Because, after all, what's stopping us? Now, you could tell me, if you wanted, that you would do all those things if you weren't God-fearing. But I would choose not to believe you. I have more respect for you, if not for your opinions, than that.
All right, Jonathan Swift. Not just reviewers of your book, but Jonathan Swift is at least aware of this argument. He has an essay in which he has a country yokel listening to the arguments of an atheist and then declaring, quote, "Why, sir, if it be as you say, I can drink and whore and defy the parson."
So far, so good.
Close quote. But if there is no God, if there is no objective ground of right and wrong, from what do you derive your morals? From what do you derive right and wrong?
The stupidest person in Smerdyakov, I think it is, in the Brothers Karamazov, says, though he turns out himself to be a very moral person, he says, but without God wouldn't everything be permitted. That's the sense of what he said.
Right.
By the way, I think some people who say this may fear it to be true of themselves. I mean, some people who are psycho or sociopathic may conceivably have the view that only superstition restrains them from cruelty, theft, rapine, violence, utter selfishness and so forth. But I don't believe it's true, first. I think our knowledge of right and wrong is innate in us. Religion gets its morality from humans. We know that we can't get along if we permit perjury, theft, murder, rape. All societies at all times, well before the advent of monotheism certainly, have forbidden it.
If morality, a sense of morality, is another adaptive or evolved faculty, the problem is that there are all kinds of things that we're stuck with as a result of evolution, if one posits evolution. So you feel biological urges, you feel the impulse to steal, and yet at the same time you have some kind of innate morality that tells you not to steal. So the question is, with a religious point of view, it gives you some way, you say there's an objective standard according to which we can we recognize that certain of these impulses are acceptable and certain other impulses are to be disciplined and restrained and so forth. I don't understand how, if you take it all as a kind of evolutionary result of evolution, let's put it that way, how it is that you can say morality is over and above other urges. How do you do that?
Well, two observations.
All right.
One, I mentioned in my book a Muslim taxi driver in Washington, D.C., who returned quite a lot of money that my wife had left on the back of his cab. It must have taken him quite a while to work out whose it was,
right?
Where she lived, where he dropped her off. To come back into town, he lived in the burbs, losing quite a lot of labor and time and effort just in doing that, to return what I can tell you would be more than he probably could hope to make in a week. And he wouldn't even take the 10% I wanted to give him. I really absolutely crammed it into his top pocket. He really wouldn't, thought it was insulting almost, because he said it was his Islamic duty. Now, as it happens, I think, and I suspect you think too, that most of the preachments of the Quran are either fatuous or wicked. They enjoin evil on many people, and they claim to believe in things that shouldn't be believed in on sheer grounds of absurdity, such as the Archangel Gabriel appearing to an illiterate Arab merchant, or a night journey to Jerusalem on a winged horse, or any of this nonsense. But for him, without it, he couldn't imagine being moral. Well, I'm sorry, I think that's insulting too. Now, take something that isn't necessarily evolutionary or determined by, in the crude terms you suggest. If I'm making a speech,
Right.
and I make a cheap point to get a laugh, which I'm not above doing, I can do that, or I skip a stage in an argument, to make an inexpensive point, and especially if it works, and I get them, I feel a pang. I think.
Oh, do you?
Especially if it works. Why is this? Not to be grand about it, but what Socrates called his daemon. It was an inner voice that stopped him when he was trying to take advantage of someone in an argument, wrongly. Adam Smith calls it the sort of unspoken partner in conversation whose approval we hope to get. Lewis calls it conscience and says it's proof of the existence of God. That's stretching it enormously further than it will go. Why don't we just assume that we do have some internal compass, and that if we didn't, we couldn't be the partially rational mammals that we are.
Rational. All right. This brings us on to this. Okay. By the way, all of that seems. I'm delighted to see that we're making progress here, Christopher. I'm bringing you along. So your argument is then that when the taxi driver returned your wife's money, that was the human shining through in spite of the religious overlay.
I would say, yeah.
All right.
I believe if we define conscience as you were about to, or morality as you were about to, my definition would be what do you do, how do you do something when no one's looking.
Okay.
Now, in this case, he could easily have got away with it.
Right, of course.
But he couldn't live with himself if he did. Well, who doesn't have that feeling? And why do we degrade this feeling by saying it's a heavenly gift accompanied by a threat of heavenly punishment?
You raise the question of rationality. Lewis makes the point, quote, granted that reason is prior to matter, that as it is in most religious outlets, certainly in the Judeo-Christian conception, granted that reason is prior to matter, I can understand how men should come, by observation and inference, to know a lot about the universe they live in. If, on the other hand, minds are wholly dependent on brains, and brains on biochemistry, and biochemistry on the meaningless flux of atoms, that is to say, if there's nothing but material, this is the materialistic worldview, I cannot understand how the thought of those minds should have any more significance than the sound of the wind in the trees, close quote. Set aside questions of right and wrong and pangs of conscience to the question of reason itself. If you have a thoroughgoing materialist view of the world, doesn't that tend to represent an attack on reason itself, or at least lower? Why should the work of Christopher Hitchens have any more claim on my attention than the random poundings at a keyboard of a chimp?
Well,
isn't that a serious philosophical problem?
No, it isn't.
It isn't.
As usually, Lewis is chewing much more than he bites off. As it happens, I've had my DNA sequenced recently. You can get yours done too. You should. By the way.
You had it done?
Yeah, you can find what we always suspected. I'm half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee, related also to plant and vegetable and other matter, as well as other animals. And I don't think evolution even knows that I'm here. And I don't think that the Big Bang originated with me in mind. I'm sorry to say that I'm not as solipsistic and self-centered and arrogant as the religious would have me be. I don't think that these processes had me in mind or are aware of my presence. Doesn't make me feel that I can go and do anything I want. Why doesn't it? I don't know why it doesn't. But I do know, by counterexample, that if I put this problem to you, name me an ethical action taken or a moral statement made by a believer that could not have been made or performed by a non-believer. I very much doubt you'll be able to do it. At least no one else has been able to yet. Give you time for it. If I asked any audience, can they think of a wicked action undertaken or a wicked statement made because of religion, nobody has a single second of hesitation before they can think of one. So you have advanced the argument not at all. In fact, you've again degraded it to the view that we ought to believe foolish things, such as that we need divine permission to behave well, because if we didn't believe this, we might behave badly. Well, the facts are what they are, and the fact is that actually material does come first.
But I've already granted you.
The mind is a brain before it's anything else. Of course, anyone who says to the contrary is talking abject nonsense.
No, but I think you're opening yourself to. All right, if you won't take it from Lewis, take it from Darwin. I'm quoting Charles Darwin now. Precisely the same point, by the way. With me, the horrid doubt always arises, Darwin writes in a letter, whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind? Close quote. That's precisely the same point. If there's nothing but the material world, excuse me, I grant that we feel pangs of conscience. I grant that we all lead our lives as though we take reason completely for
Yes.
granted, the way that we take the air we breathe.
Yeah.
It's there.
With
we
nothing but the
recognize
material
it.
world to go on.